I must bury you today.
He came home on Christmas Eve and caught his wife burying his mother alive. He came home on Christmas Eve just in time to see his wife forcing his mother's head into the mud. Not just any woman, his own mother. The woman who raised him with tired hands and hungry prayers. The woman who carried his childhood on her back and never asked for applause. He wasn't supposed to return that night. The trip was meant to last 2 more days. She didn't know his car had already turned into the compound, or that he was standing behind the gate, watching her move with a kind of cruelty that didn't belong to a human being. He thought he married a gentle woman, a church-going, soft-spoken wife everyone praised. But what he saw in that cold Christmas air shattered the image completely. Now, it's not just a holiday, it's a horror. Not just a marriage, but a betrayal with blood on it. Because if he speaks up, his home will explode. If he stays silent, his mother might never breathe again. And in the next few seconds, he will make one decision that will either save a life or bury his future forever. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ocean of Tales. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe on this channel. We will be grateful if you help us do this. We will be notifying you when we drop a new video. Don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Cold air rushed into the car the moment he stepped out, biting through his shirt and raising goosebumps along his arms. Christmas Eve should have smelled like food and music, but the compound breathed something else entirely. Wet earth, rusted silence, unease. His headlights swept across the yard, catching puddles of mud that shouldn't have been there, freshly disturbed, dark and heavy. The engine died, leaving a quiet so deep it rang in his ears. He paused, keys still in his hand, sensing that coming home early hadn't surprised the night, but it had invited something waiting, something that didn't want to be seen yet. The gate resisted when he pushed it open, metal scraping metal with a long, aching groan that echoed too loudly in the stillness. No lights flicked on. No familiar movement answered. The house stood dark, withdrawn, like it was holding its breath. His shoes sank slightly into the soft ground, mud clinging to the soles as he stepped inside. He slowed instinctively, heart ticking faster with each step, aware of a strange rhythm ahead, uneven, hurried, wrong. It wasn't celebration he felt pulling him forward now. It was instinct, sharp and urgent, urging him to see what the darkness was hiding. A shadow moved near the back of the compound, low to the ground, frantic and deliberate. He stopped cold, chest tightening as his eyes adjusted. The shadow shifted again, closer to the small patch of earth near the fence where nothing was usually touched. His breath caught when he noticed hands, one pushing, one clawing. The ground looked torn open, fresh and violent, like it had been attacked. His mind rejected the image before it fully formed, scrambling for explanations that didn't fit. Whatever was happening back there wasn't meant to happen at all, especially not tonight. A sound broke through the silence, wet, muffled, desperate. Not loud enough to be a scream, but too human to ignore. His pulse slammed against his ribs as recognition crept in slowly, painfully. That voice didn't belong in the mud. That movement didn't belong on the ground. His legs refused to move, frozen between fear and disbelief, while his eyes strained to see more clearly. The shadow leaned forward again, forceful, relentless. And suddenly, the shape beneath it shifted just enough for him to see gray hair matted with dirt, and everything inside him shattered at once. His stomach dropped as the truth rushed in faster than his breath could follow. That wasn't a stranger. That wasn't an intruder. That was his mother, pressed into the earth, fighting for air, her body weak against the weight forcing her down. And the person above her, using both hands, moving with terrifying intention, wore a familiar shape. A shape he knew, loved, trusted. The realization hit harder than any sound, louder than any scream. His wife's outline became unmistakable in the dim light, and the world tilted violently on its axis. His hands trembled as he grabbed the gate, knuckles whitening against cold metal. Every instinct screamed to run, to shout, to tear her away, but shock glued him to the ground. His heart pounded so hard it drowned out the night, each beat counting seconds he couldn't afford to lose. Mud squelched under pressure as his wife shifted her stance, digging in, determined. His mother's movements grew weaker, slower, desperate fingers scraping earth that refused to give. The gap between seeing and acting stretched unbearably thin, and he stood trapped inside it. Christmas lights flickered faintly from a neighbor's window beyond the fence, cruel and distant, mocking the horror unfolding inside his own home. He tasted iron in his mouth, breath shallow, vision narrowing to the violent scene before him. Everything he believed about love, marriage, and safety collapsed into that patch of mud. This was the moment that would divide his life into before and after. He knew it, even as he struggled to move. Because whatever he did next, whatever choice he made, someone would not walk away the same, if they walked away at all. Memory crashed into him the moment he saw her face, dragging him backward through time with brutal force. Before the mud, before the fear, there was his mother standing at a riverbank before dawn, lifting heavy buckets with hands already worn thin by life. Cold mornings, bare feet, breath visible in the air as she worked without complaint. She had learned early that survival didn't ask for fairness, only endurance. Even now, buried beneath dirt and terror, her body carried the same quiet strength. And he realized with a sickening ache that this was how she had always lived, bearing weight alone, unseen. Sunlight once followed her through endless days of labor, washing clothes until her fingers cracked, cooking meals she barely tasted, saving the best portions for him without explanation. She spoke softly, laughed rarely, and rested even less. Sacrifice wasn't a choice for her. It was a rhythm. He remembered nights she pretended not to be hungry, turning her face away so he wouldn't notice. Now, watching her struggle for breath, he felt the cruelty of history repeating itself, his mother once again paying a price so someone else could feel powerful, comfortable, untouched. School fees, uniforms, books, each one had come from something she denied herself. She had traded youth for responsibility, comfort for purpose, silence for survival. He remembered her praying late at night, kneeling on cold floors, whispering hopes into darkness she believed listened. Those prayers had carried him forward when nothing else could. And now, as mud pressed against her mouth, he understood something devastating. She had never learned how to fight for herself, only how to endure for others. That realization tightened his chest more painfully than fear ever could. He remembered the day he left home, her standing by the road long after the bus disappeared, waving until distance swallowed him whole. She had smiled then, proud and afraid, trusting the world to be kinder to him than it had been to her. Every step he took forward had been built on her quiet suffering. Every success carried her fingerprints. And now, here she was again, alone in danger, trusting someone else's hands, hands that had turned merciless in the dark. The injustice of it burned hot and uncontrollable inside him. Her body had grown smaller with age, shoulders slightly bent, voice thinner, yet her presence always filled a room. She never demanded respect. She earned it through patience and humility. Even when she came to live with him, she kept herself small, careful not to intrude, grateful for things she deserved without question. Watching her now, pressed into the earth like she was worth nothing, shattered the last excuse he had for staying still. This wasn't just about saving a life. It was about honoring every unseen sacrifice that had made his own life possible. A bitter truth settled in his mind with crushing clarity. He had brought her into this house believing it was safe. He had promised her peace. He had assured himself that love could coexist quietly with history, with jealousy, with unspoken tension. He had been wrong, painfully wrong. The mud clinging to her hair felt like a judgment on his choices, a physical reminder that neglect doesn't always look loud. it sometimes looks like trust placed in the wrong hands. And that trust had almost cost everything. As his mother's movements weakened, memories continued to surge, her voice calling him in from the rain, her hands steadying his first steps, her body shielding him from hardship he never fully understood. Those memories didn't comfort him now. They demanded action. They pressed against his conscience, stripping away hesitation, leaving only responsibility. This was the woman who gave him life without ever asking for repayment. And now, on Christmas Eve, her life hung in the balance, waiting to see whether her silence would finally be answered with courage or betrayal one last time. The image of her rose in his mind like a cruel contradiction, bright and polished, refusing to align with what his eyes had just seen. She was the woman people admired at gatherings, the one who spoke gently and listened carefully, whose smile felt warm and reassuring. Neighbors called her respectful. Elders praised her upbringing. In public, she moved with calm grace, never raising her voice, never stepping out of line. Standing behind that gate now, he struggled to reconcile that familiar picture with a figure crouched in the mud, driven by something dark and deliberate. Church mornings replayed themselves in his memory, her head bowed in devotion, hands clasped neatly as if nothing in the world could stain them. She volunteered easily, quoted scripture softly, and carried herself like someone who feared God. He remembered the pride he felt watching others admire her, the quiet relief of believing he had chosen well. That image had shielded her, protected her from suspicion, even from his own doubts. And now, under the cold night sky, that shield cracked violently, exposing a truth that made his stomach churn. He thought back to the early days of their marriage, how she had been careful around his mother at first, polite, restrained, almost distant. Nothing alarming. Just a slight stiffness he dismissed as adjustment. Over time, the warmth faded, replaced by cold efficiency, subtle corrections, long silences. He had noticed it but never named it. It felt easier to believe harmony would grow naturally. Standing there now, he understood those small shifts weren't harmless changes. They were the early footsteps of something learning how far it could go. The house had always felt different when his mother was around, tighter somehow, like the air itself held tension. Meals became quieter. Laughter shortened. He blamed routine, stress, the normal friction of shared space. He never imagined resentment was growing teeth. Watching his wife's posture now, focused, unyielding, he realized control had replaced kindness long before tonight. Whatever admiration the world gave her had become fuel, convincing her she could act without consequence, unseen, unquestioned, righteous in her own mind. What terrified him most wasn't just the cruelty, it was how comfortable she looked wielding it. There was no panic in her movements, no hesitation. This wasn't a moment of sudden rage. It felt practiced, intentional, rehearsed in private thoughts long before it reached the ground. The woman he loved had learned how to hide her darkness well, wrapping it in respectability and praise. And the realization hit him harder than fear. If she could deceive everyone so completely, how much of his marriage had been built on lies? He felt shame rise alongside anger, a bitter mix that tightened his throat. How many times had he defended her without knowing what he was defending? How many warnings had he ignored because the world applauded her goodness? The praise she received now echoed mockingly in his ears, each compliment turned into an accusation. He had trusted appearances over instincts, silence over questions. And now, as he watched her press down harder, he understood that deception doesn't always shout. It often kneels quietly in places no one thinks to look. The cold night seemed to pull back another layer, revealing a truth he could no longer escape. The woman everyone praised was not the woman standing before him now. That realization ripped through him with a force that demanded reckoning. Love warped into disbelief. Trust collapsed into clarity. And as he stood frozen behind the gate, watching the last fragments of her false image fall away, one terrifying question rose above the rest. How long had this version of her been waiting for a moment like this? Time fractured the moment his mother's chest jerked unevenly against the ground. each breath shorter than the last. The mud glistened under a thin moon, thick and stubborn, swallowing sound as it swallowed air. His wife leaned forward again, weight shifting, heels digging in for balance, and the earth responded with a wet pull that made his stomach lurch. Every second stretched, elastic and cruel, as if the night itself refused to hurry. He felt the clock inside his head screaming while the world outside moved in slow, unforgiving frames. Cold slammed into his lungs as he inhaled too sharply, breath rasping loud in his ears. His mother's hands clawed weakly, fingers slipping, nails caked, strength draining fast. The ground offered no mercy, only resistance. He watched the rhythm of her struggle falter, the desperate rise and fall losing its fight. The realization cut deep and immediate. This wasn't punishment or fear. This was suffocation, measured and deliberate. And as the mud pressed closer to her face, the cost of waiting revealed itself with brutal clarity. His body surged forward on instinct, muscles tightening, knees bending, ready to explode into motion. Then doubt slammed the brakes hard. His wife's presence shattered his momentum, disbelief wrapping around his spine like ice. The woman he shared a bed with was now the force pressing life away from his mother's lungs. His mind scrambled for logic, for misunderstanding, for some impossible explanation that would make this less real. But the mud didn't lie. The movement didn't lie. And the weakening struggle beneath her weight refused to soften the truth. Fear sharpened into urgency as his mother's movements slowed again, fingers trembling before sinking back into the ground. The sound she made, half gasp, half prayer, cut straight through him. His chest burned with the need to act, but consequences stacked themselves mercilessly in his thoughts. If he rushed forward now, everything would shatter. Marriage, reputation, home. If he hesitated, the night might claim a life that had already given too much. The choice pressed down on him, heavy and immediate, demanding more than courage. His heart hammered violently, blood roaring louder than the night insects, louder than the distant hum of a neighbor's generator. Sweat chilled along his back despite the cold. He saw his wife's shoulders tense again, saw her adjust her grip, saw resolve where hesitation should have been. This wasn't a mistake unfolding. It was a decision being completed. The gap between them felt enormous now, stretched by betrayal and time. He understood with terrifying clarity that indecision was no longer neutral. It was an action of its own. A sharp tremor rippled through his mother's body, then faded, leaving a stillness that felt wrong, dangerous. Panic surged, wild and uncontrollable, flooding his senses. The world narrowed to mud, breath, and the woman forcing the ground to win. His feet shifted at last, weight changing, muscles coiling with intent. Whatever came after this moment, chaos, loss, judgment, would be shaped by what he did next. The night leaned in, watching, as if even the darkness needed to know who he truly was. Christmas bells rang faintly from somewhere far beyond the compound, hollow and distant, clashing cruelly with the horror at his feet. He felt something break inside him, clean and final, snapping hesitation away. This wasn't a question of love anymore. It was a question of life. His pulse steadied with grim resolve as he stepped forward, crossing the invisible line between witness and action. Because the next movement, his movement, would decide whether this night ended with a rescue or a grave that could never be filled. The night did not create this violence. It only revealed it. As he moved closer, flashes of the past collided violently in his mind. Small moments he had dismissed, brushed aside, laughed off. A tightened jaw during meals. A cold glance when his mother lingered too long in the living room. Silence stretched deliberately after harmless comments. None of it had seemed dangerous then. Now those memories rearranged themselves into a pattern too clear to ignore. Cruelty hadn't appeared suddenly. It had been learning, growing patient, waiting for a moment when no one would interrupt. He remembered how correction replaced kindness in subtle ways. How instructions became sharper, more frequent, delivered with forced calm that felt heavier than shouting. His wife never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Control lived in her pauses, in the way she watched to see how much obedience she could extract without resistance. He had mistaken that restraint for maturity for discipline. Standing there now, he understood restraint had simply been camouflage. Cruelty doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it whispers, smiling politely while it studies its target. Jealousy had crept in quietly too, masked as concern. Questions about inheritance. Complaints disguised as jokes. Comments about space and respect that carried sharp edges beneath their softness. His mother had grown quieter over time, shrinking herself to avoid friction, grateful for peace even when it cost her comfort. That shrinking hadn't satisfied his wife, it had empowered her. Silence became permission. Each swallowed insult taught cruelty that it could push further, press harder, demand more. And no one, not even him, had drawn the line. He recalled moments when his wife smiled at others while issuing orders behind closed doors, the switch seamless and practiced. Public warmth. Private control. It had confused him once, made him uneasy, but comfort always returned when outsiders praised her. Approval from others became her shield, convincing her she was untouchable. Watching her now, balanced in the mud, jaw set with focus, he realized she wasn't panicking because she believed no one would question her. She had rehearsed this confidence for years, fueled by silence and applause. What hurt most was recognizing his own role in it. His absence during tense moments. His habit of choosing calm over confrontation. His belief that problems solve themselves if ignored long enough. Each time he walked away, cruelty stepped closer. Each time he chose peace, power shifted dangerously. He had mistaken avoidance for wisdom, thinking love meant not choosing sides. But cruelty thrives in neutrality. And now, with his mother's life hanging in the balance, neutrality had become a weapon pointed inward. His wife's face twisted briefly as she adjusted her grip again, effort flashing across her features before smoothing back into control. That moment revealed everything. This wasn't emotion overwhelming her. It was intention being completed. The satisfaction was subtle but present, hidden behind clenched focus. Cruelty had learned not only how to hurt, but how to enjoy the silence afterward. And the realization burned through him with unbearable clarity. This wasn't about anger or loss of control. This was about power finally being exercised without restraint. As he stepped closer, the past and present fused into one terrifying truth. Cruelty doesn't need monsters to survive. It only needs opportunity, silence, and time. His wife had mastered all three. The smile she wore for the world had protected her long enough to believe she was right, justified, invisible. But tonight, that illusion cracked. And as he moved toward the scene, one final question tightened in his chest, heavy and unavoidable. How much damage had already been done before anyone chose to see? A cold realization cut through him as he moved closer. The warnings had been there all along, scattered like broken signs he refused to read. His mother's sudden silences. The way her visits became shorter, less frequent, filled with excuses that sounded rehearsed. He remembered how she avoided being alone in the house, how her hands trembled when his wife's footsteps approached. At the time, he had called it age, nerves, unnecessary fear. Now, watching her buried in mud, those dismissed moments rose sharply, demanding accountability he could no longer escape. He recalled a night when his mother insisted on sleeping with her door locked, something she had never done before. The look in her eyes then, uneasy, apologetic, almost ashamed, had unsettled him briefly before routine swallowed the concern. He had chosen comfort over curiosity, telling himself he was imagining tension that didn't exist. Standing in the cold now, he understood that fear often speaks softly, hoping someone will listen before it's forced to scream. And he had chosen not to listen. There were cultural warnings too, quiet and persistent, passed through relatives in cautious tones. Advice about watching carefully when families blend, about jealousy that grows in silence, about respect turning into rivalry if unchecked. He had brushed those words aside, calling them old beliefs, unnecessary suspicion. He wanted to believe love was enough to overcome everything. Now, as he watched the consequences unfold, those ignored cautions returned with weight, each one landing like a verdict he had signed without reading. He remembered moments when instinct tugged at him, small flares of discomfort he quickly smothered with logic. A sharp tone here. A door closed too hard there. The air in the house shifting subtly whenever his mother entered the room. His body had noticed long before his mind did. But acknowledging it would have meant confrontation, discomfort, choice. So he swallowed it, convincing himself that harmony required silence. In truth, silence had only sharpened what it tried to avoid. Spiritual warnings surfaced too, carried in prayers his mother whispered and glances she held too long. She had asked him once if he was truly at peace at home, her voice careful, guarded. He had laughed it off, assured her everything was fine, that she was safe. The lie tasted bitter now. Faith had tried to intervene gently, offering signs before disaster demanded force. And he had ignored them all, trusting appearances more than intuition. As the night pressed in, guilt wrapped tightly around his chest, heavier than fear. He saw now that danger rarely arrives unannounced. It sends signals, tests boundaries, waits to see if anyone will respond. Each ignored warning had been an invitation, and cruelty had accepted eagerly. The realization hollowed him, stripping away excuses he once relied on. This wasn't sudden tragedy. It was accumulated neglect finally collecting its due. The final warning stood before him now, undeniable and brutal, written in mud and fading breath. There would be no more signs after this, no quiet nudges or subtle discomforts. Only outcome. As he stepped closer, heart pounding with regret and resolve, one truth burned clear through him: ignoring warnings doesn't make them disappear. It only ensures they return louder, sharper, and far more costly than anyone ever expects. The compound seemed to lean inward as he crossed deeper into it, walls rising tall and indifferent, holding years of swallowed sound inside them. The gate behind him stood half open, no longer a barrier but a witness, creaking softly in the wind like it wanted to confess. This house had heard arguments disguised as whispers, commands softened into politeness, fear hidden behind routine. It had absorbed every moment without protest, polished floors reflecting calm while cruelty learned where to hide. Tonight, the silence felt heavy, almost accusing, as if the house itself was tired of pretending nothing had ever happened here. The night air carried echoes he could almost hear, muted cries, hurried footsteps, doors closed a second too fast. The walls had watched his mother retreat into herself, watched her make herself smaller to survive. They had watched his wife grow bolder in private, testing limits where no one would intervene. Even the ground beneath his feet felt complicit, soft and torn, bearing the imprint of violence it had been forced to accept. Every surface around him seemed to remember, holding evidence in texture and smell, refusing to let the truth remain buried any longer. Lights from inside the house glowed faintly through drawn curtains, warm and deceptive, promising comfort they never delivered. From the street, this place looked respectable, successful, enviable. Inside, it functioned differently, rewarding silence and punishing exposure. He realized now that privacy had protected cruelty, giving it space to grow unchecked. The house had been an accomplice, not by action, but by stillness. It offered corners without witnesses, rooms without questions, nights without interruption. And in doing so, it had allowed something unforgivable to unfold right under its roof. He noticed how sound behaved strangely here, how even his own footsteps felt swallowed before they could echo. Noise didn't travel easily in this compound. It sank into walls and disappeared. That was why no one came running. Why no neighbor heard anything. Why suffering could happen quietly, efficiently, without consequence. The design that once felt like security now revealed itself as isolation. The house didn't just hide secrets, it trained them to survive. And tonight, it had nearly succeeded in hiding a death. The mud-stained corner near the fence felt like a scar on the compound's image, raw and undeniable. No amount of cleaning would erase what had happened there. He imagined future days when the ground would look normal again, when grass would grow back, when no one would suspect anything. The thought made his stomach turn. This place would move on quickly, but memory would not. The house could return to silence, but the truth had already broken free, carried now by his eyes, his breath, his conscience. He understood then that spaces are not neutral. They shape behavior, reward certain actions, punish others. This house had rewarded control, secrecy, dominance. It had punished vulnerability, noise, resistance. His mother had learned that lesson painfully well. So had his wife, though in a different way. The environment had tilted the balance long before this night, quietly deciding who held power and who endured it. And by living here without questioning it, he had allowed that balance to stand. As he stood between the house and the open yard, he felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. This place would never be innocent to him again. Every wall, every corner, every quiet room would carry the memory of what it had witnessed. The house had heard everything. The question now was whether it would continue to keep those secrets, or whether tonight marked the moment silence finally lost its hold. He felt his chest split in two as he stepped closer, the space between loyalty and instinct tearing wider with every breath. Marriage vows echoed faintly in his head, tangled with memories of promises made under bright lights and smiling witnesses. At the same time, blood pulled at him with a force that felt ancient and unbreakable. His mother's weakening form lay at the center of that pull, her life slipping away while he stood suspended between two worlds. Love demanded silence. Blood demanded action. And the night refused to give him more time to decide. His hands curled into fists as conflicting images crashed through him, his wife's smile on their wedding day, his mother's hands guiding him as a child. Both women occupied his heart, but not on equal ground. One had chosen him. The other had created him. That difference throbbed painfully now, impossible to ignore. The realization hurt more than betrayal. Love could be chosen, but blood could not be replaced. Standing there, he understood that neutrality was no longer possible. Whatever he protected next would expose what he truly valued. Fear whispered consequences in his ear, sharp and relentless. Intervention would shatter his marriage publicly and permanently. Silence would bury guilt deep enough to rot everything he touched afterward. He imagined life continuing either way, one version hollow with regret, the other scarred by loss. The weight of masculinity pressed in two, the expectation to control chaos, to make the hardest choice without flinching. His pulse raced as he realized that courage wasn't loud in moments like this. It was quiet, trembling, and demanded sacrifice before it offered peace. His mother's body shifted faintly again, a reminder that time wasn't pausing for his internal war. The sound she made cut through every excuse he tried to build. It wasn't a call for help anymore, it was a plea for recognition. He saw himself reflected in her struggle, his existence tracing back to her endurance. Love for his wife suddenly felt conditional, built on trust that had already collapsed. Love for his mother felt absolute, carved into his bones long before he knew how to choose. He realized then that this wasn't just a choice between two women, it was a choice between the man he had been pretending to be and the man this moment demanded. Protecting peace had always felt safer than protecting truth. But peace purchased with silence tasted bitter now. The ground beneath his feet seemed to demand clarity, pressing upward like a verdict. His hesitation had already cost seconds he could never recover. The collision between love and blood was no longer theoretical. It was happening in real time with a life on the line. A surge of resolve tightened his spine, cutting through fear with sudden clarity. Whatever came after this night would be shaped by this decision alone. Reputation, marriage, comfort. None of it mattered more than the breath his mother was struggling to draw. He understood that choosing blood didn't mean rejecting love. It meant rejecting cruelty. And if love required him to betray the woman who gave him life, then love itself had been twisted into something unrecognizable. That truth settled heavy, but it steadied him. As he shifted his weight forward, fully committing to action, the night seemed to hold still, waiting to witness the outcome. This was the moment that would follow him forever, the one he would replay in silence years from now. Love and blood had collided, and only one could survive the impact unchanged. With his heart pounding and his future unraveling behind him, he crossed the final distance, ready to choose, knowing that once he did, there would be no turning back. The balance of power shifted the instant his foot hit the mud, sending a sharp sound through the quiet yard. His wife froze, head snapping slightly, as if she sensed something behind her before she truly saw it. Control drained from the scene in one breathless second, replaced by tension so thick it pressed against the skin. The night no longer belonged to her alone. The confidence that had fueled her movements moments ago wavered, cracking under the sudden weight of being witnessed. Karma didn't arrive loudly. It arrived the moment secrecy collapsed. Fear flashed across her posture, subtle but undeniable, as she realized she was no longer invisible. Her grip loosened just enough to betray panic, and the mud shifted beneath her weight. The woman who had acted with certainty seconds earlier now hesitated, calculating outcomes instead of enforcing control. That hesitation mattered. It was the first fracture in her dominance, the first sign that power rooted in silence cannot survive exposure. The yard felt charged now, alive with consequence, as if the compound itself had decided which side it would no longer protect. His presence changed everything without a single word. The authority she had exercised so freely collapsed into something fragile and reactive. She straightened slightly, eyes darting, breath uneven, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she looked in the open. The cruelty that thrived in isolation struggled under attention. It needed darkness, privacy, and unquestioned control. Now, stripped of those comforts, it faltered. Karma worked efficiently, not through punishment yet, but through reversal, forcing her to feel what it meant to be seen and judged. The mud-stained ground bore witness to the shift, no longer swallowing sound as before. His mother's chest rose weakly again as pressure eased, air finally slipping where it had been denied. That small movement felt monumental, like the night itself exhaled. The consequence of cruelty wasn't immediate justice, it was loss of control. And in losing control, his wife lost the confidence that had driven her this far. The compound no longer obeyed her silence. It responded instead to truth stepping forward. Panic crept into her movements, sharp and unrefined, replacing the calm precision she once wielded. She looked smaller now, less certain, as if the authority she believed permanent had been borrowed all along. His heart pounded as he recognized the transformation unfolding before him. This was karma in motion, not dramatic, not supernatural, but relentless. It didn't need revenge to begin working. It simply removed the illusion that cruelty could exist without consequence, leaving fear to fill the space control once occupied. The yard felt different now, charged with a tension that favored truth over secrecy. He saw it clearly. Karma wasn't just arriving for her. It was arriving for everyone who had benefited from silence, including himself. The realization stung sharply, grounding him in the reality that consequence spreads outward, touching more than its original target. This night would mark them all, reshaping roles they thought were fixed. And the worst part was knowing this was only the beginning, not the end. As the night pressed closer, he understood that what had entered the compound could not be escorted out easily. Karma had found an opening and stepped inside quietly, patiently, without announcement. It would stay long after the mud dried, long after voices rose and fell. This was the turning point, the moment cruelty lost its shield and consequence claimed its place. And as fear replaced confidence in his wife's eyes, one truth settled heavy in his chest. Nothing inside this compound would ever return to how it was before. Morning arrived without mercy, dragging light into places that had thrived on darkness. The compound looked different under the sun, stripped of its secrecy, every corner exposed and ordinary. The mud near the fence dried into cracked evidence, refusing to disappear. Neighbors passed more slowly than usual, eyes lingering, sensing imbalance even without details. The quiet that once protected the house now felt suspicious, heavy with unasked questions. His wife moved through the morning stiffly, aware that the night had fractured something she could not rebuild, no matter how carefully she behaved. Whispers began before explanations could form, sliding through the neighborhood like smoke. Absence speaks loudly in close communities, and his mother's sudden invisibility drew attention fast. Familiar greetings felt colder, shorter, edged with curiosity. Respect no longer flowed easily toward his wife. It paused, measured, uncertain. She felt it in the way people looked twice, in the way conversations stopped when she approached. The admiration she once wore like armor thinned quickly, leaving her exposed to judgment she had never prepared to face. The church that once echoed her praises grew uncomfortably quiet around her presence. Smiles stiffened. Conversations shifted. Eyes lowered or lingered too long. The space that once affirmed her righteousness now questioned it silently. She sensed the change instantly, the way approval evaporates when belief cracks. The moral ground she stood on felt unstable, crumbling beneath her feet. Faith, which had once shielded her image, now demanded accountability. And accountability was something she had never planned for. Inside the house, objects felt out of place, as if even the furniture remembered what had happened. She avoided mirrors, uncomfortable with the person staring back. The confidence that once guided her movements had dissolved into vigilance. Every sound startled her. Every knock tightened her chest. Control had been replaced by constant calculation, the exhausting work of maintaining a version of herself that no longer convinced anyone, including herself. The home that once empowered her now felt hostile, filled with reminders she couldn't silence. Community judgment grew heavier by the hour, not loud but persistent, settling into daily interactions. Invitations stopped coming. Friendly visits ended abruptly. Her name traveled ahead of her, carrying questions she couldn't answer without unraveling everything. The isolation tightened around her like a slow trap, built from the same silence she once relied on. She discovered too late that reputation is fragile, and once fractured, it doesn't heal quietly. The world she curated so carefully now examined her through a lens she couldn't control. Shame settled into her routines, dull and suffocating. She replayed the night repeatedly, not with remorse at first, but with fear. Fear of exposure, fear of loss, fear of consequences she couldn't predict. Power had once made her bold. Now fear made her cautious, brittle, reactive. She realized that cruelty, once exposed, turns inward, eating away at the person who wielded it. The strength she thought she possessed had been borrowed from silence, and silence had abandoned her completely. As dusk approached again, she understood with growing clarity that the world she knew was gone. The admiration, the authority, the safety of appearances, none of it remained intact. What stood in its place was scrutiny, judgment, and a truth pressing closer with every passing hour. Her world hadn't turned upside down suddenly. It was being inverted piece by piece, deliberately, inevitably. And deep inside, beneath fear and denial, one realization surfaced painfully. This was only the beginning of what she would have to face. The house did not feel like a home anymore. It felt like the aftermath of a storm that had chosen sides. His mother lay resting, fragile but alive, her breath shallow yet steady, each one a quiet victory. The smell of antiseptic mixed with earth still clung to the air, a reminder of how close death had come. He stood nearby, watching her chest rise and fall, knowing that this fragile rhythm had cost him something permanent. Saving her life had already begun to dismantle the life he once believed was secure. The distance between him and his wife became physical, unmistakable, carved into the rooms they once shared. She moved around him like a stranger, cautious and restrained, as though one wrong step would shatter what little remained. The warmth that once lived between them had vanished overnight, replaced by a tension that hummed constantly beneath the surface. Even silence felt loud now, packed with accusations neither of them dared to voice. The marriage still existed in name, but its heart had stopped beating long before anyone acknowledged it. He felt the weight of his decision settle deeper with each passing hour. There was no triumph in doing the right thing, no relief that softened the loss. Justice demanded payment, and the currency was intimacy, trust, and shared future plans. He mourned the version of life he thought he was building. The holidays, the children, the quiet companionship. Choosing his mother had been instinctive, unavoidable, but it did not come without grief. Right choices, he learned, do not always feel good. They simply feel necessary. His wife's presence grew smaller in his awareness, fading into the background as her power dissolved. Where she once filled space with confidence, she now occupied corners, withdrawn and defensive. Her attempts at normalcy felt forced, rehearsed, unable to bridge the gap between them. He no longer recognized the woman he married, not because she had changed overnight, but because the truth had finally removed the mask. And with that realization came the understanding that love built on illusion cannot survive exposure. The community's quiet judgment followed him everywhere, not as condemnation, but as expectation. People watched him closely, measuring his strength, his resolve, his morality. Saving his mother had earned respect, but it had also placed him under scrutiny. He felt the burden of being the man who chose truth over peace, a role that offered no comfort. Responsibility pressed heavier now, reshaping his identity in ways he hadn't anticipated. He was no longer just a husband. He was a protector who had crossed a line he could never step back from. Nights stretched long and restless, filled with memories that refused to settle. He replayed the moment he acted, wondering how close he came to losing everything that mattered. Sleep brought no escape, only quiet questions that echoed louder in the dark. Could anything have saved both his mother and his marriage? The answer surfaced painfully every time no. Some choices divide lives cleanly in two, leaving no middle ground to stand on. As dawn approached once more, clarity replaced doubt. He had not lost everything. He had chosen what could not be replaced. His mother's life continued, fragile but real, while the marriage faded into something irreparable. The cost of that decision would follow him, shaping his days with both pride and sorrow. Saving a life had demanded the sacrifice of a future he once cherished. And as he faced the quiet aftermath, one truth settled firmly in his chest. Some losses are the price of integrity, and they must be carried, not escaped. Christmas came and went without music, without laughter, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than mourning. The decorations stayed up longer than they should have, blinking softly in rooms where joy no longer lived. Each flicker felt out of place, mocking the weight of what had happened. The compound settled into a new rhythm, slower and cautious, as if every wall remembered the night it witnessed. Nothing looked broken on the surface, yet everything underneath had been permanently altered, carrying scars no celebration could cover. His mother moved carefully now, her body healing while her spirit carried invisible wounds. She spoke less, smiled cautiously, and watched the world with a gentleness sharpened by survival. Gratitude lived in her eyes, but so did something deeper, an understanding of how close life had come to slipping away. Her presence filled the house with quiet resilience, reminding everyone that survival is not always loud or triumphant. Healing unfolded slowly, demanding patience rather than celebration, and even that felt uncertain. The marriage existed only as a memory, its absence more tangible than its presence ever was. Legal steps replaced emotional ones, and closure arrived without comfort. There were no dramatic endings, only a steady dismantling of what could not be repaired. Trust once broken refused to return, no matter how carefully the pieces were handled. The future he once imagined dissolved into something unfamiliar, forcing him to redefine what family, love, and home truly meant. The community absorbed the story quietly, allowing it to become a lesson rather than spectacle. People spoke more carefully, watched more closely, and reconsidered what respect truly looked like behind closed doors. The events left a mark not just on one household, but on those who observed from a distance, challenging assumptions about kindness and appearances. The discomfort lingered, reshaping conversations and judgments long after the immediate drama faded. He carried the aftermath with him daily, not as regret, but as responsibility. The choice he made did not haunt him, it grounded him. He learned that courage rarely arrives wrapped in celebration, and morality often demands sacrifice without applause. Protecting his mother had not made him heroic, it had made him honest. And honesty, he discovered, is often a lonely place to stand. Time softened the sharpest edges, but left the lesson intact. Forgiveness remained complex, layered, and incomplete, unfolding in its own quiet way. Healing did not mean forgetting, it meant remembering without bleeding. Life continued, reshaped but intact, guided by a new awareness of how easily harm hides in familiar spaces. Christmas would come again, but it would never feel the same, forever carrying the echo of that night. What Christmas Eve left behind was not just trauma. It was a question that refused to fade. When cruelty hides inside your home, protected by silence and appearances, what will you choose to protect? Peace or truth? The answer does not arrive easily, and it never comes without cost. But once chosen, it defines who you become. And long after the lights dim and the story ends, that choice remains, waiting for anyone brave enough to face it.